Friends, we are making a series of the basics of literature, and in the first some of the videos we talked about or learnt about what is novel, what is literature, what is short story, and in recently what is drama, the development of drama. And in this tutorial we are going to learn about the basics of poetry, because poetry is one of the very distinct genres of literature, and first it came into existence and then later forms of literature. So it is very significant to overview or to know about poetry in a particular way. So this tutorial is about the basics of poetry, what is poetry, its definition, meaning, and some of the features we are going to discuss here in this tutorial. So friends, watch this tutorial completely and understand the very basics of poetry, and please subscribe to Literature Simply so that you can get updates and knowledgeable tutorials on language and literature. So friends, let's move to the screen and learn what is poetry. What is poetry? Definition, meaning, and features. Friends, we humans are curious and fascinated by the melody of sounds. We are bestowed with the ability of creating the largest number of distinct sounds than any other animal on the earth, and can interweave them to create another largest amount of words and sentences. Hence the strength of human language. When we put words together for special effect, the poetry born. The words carry their own sounds and musical quality, and when they juxtaposed, the melody get enhanced, as in these lines. Poet's poetry privately pardoned, sinners sauntering secretly to hell. Friends, here p and s sound is dominant and generated a special effect, and hence poetry attracts our attention the most. Here the pattern used to create special effect is recognized as alliteration, that is repetition of particular sound. Poetry uses such different kinds of sound patterns and language devices. Verse or poetry is the most ancient form and origin of our literature. First poetry and then drama and then other forms came into existence. Most of us think that poetry is a very complex phenomenon to compose. It might be, but let me clear, it is very easy to understand. It is considered as the most competent and effective medium to express the human emotions to utmost degree. Effective poem struck to our mind and we recite it often. We get stirred while listening to or reading a serious or too emotional poem. There are some poems which remain for all the time and recited often and often. For example, Robert Frost's poem Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, and the lines are: the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. These lines form a long-lasting impression over our mind. Let's look at what the poets and scholars say about poetry. There are n number of definitions, opinions and views about poetry advocated by poets, authors and critics, but here we'll think of a few only. Number 1, Dr. Samuel Johnson, a prolific 18th century poet and author critic, and he says about poetry, poetry is the art of uniting pleasure with truth by calling imagination to the help of reason. Here Dr. Johnson emphasizes 5 things regarding poetry. Number 1, poetry is an art. Number 2, it gives pleasure, or we read poetry for pleasure. Number 3, poetry must express truth, or poetry involves the truth. Number 4, the base of poetry is imagination, or it is built on imagination. Number 5, poetry must touch the human conscience. It should convey the facts leading to truth. Here we get the qualities of finest and great poetry in Dr. Johnson's views about poetry. The second definition is by John Stuart Mill, 19th century philosopher, and he says, what is poetry but the thoughts and words in which emotion spontaneously embodies itself? The question is the answer itself, that poetry is nothing but spontaneous expression of emotions through words, that is language. Mill inclined towards Wordsworth's theory of poetry. Number 3, William Wordsworth, a great poet of Romantic age. Poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. For Wordsworth, poetry is the means of expression of powerful feelings, which is a spontaneous activity but composed in tranquility. Later, critics have discovered, contrasting this definition, that how is it possible to recollect spontaneity and tranquility at the same time? But this view is significant to understand poetry or its theory. Number 4, Aristotle, an outstanding philosopher and critic, he says, poetry is the more philosophical and of higher value than history, for poetry tends to express the universal, history the particular. Aristotle compares history and poetry or literature and ranks poetry higher than history because poetry includes universal elements and truth. Number 5. Percy Bysshe Shelley, another great poet of Romantic age, and he says, poetry is the record of the best and happiest moments of the happiest and best minds. Here, Shelley simply states that the poetry is a historical account of great happenings in the life of a poet who possessed equally a great mind. Number 6. Samuel Taylor Coleridge, poet, critic and friend to Wordsworth. He says, prose, words in their best order, poetry, the best words in the best order. Coleridge distinguishes between prose and poetry, the structural arrangement and selection of words, appropriate order, that is structure, and selection of diction is more essential in poetry. Number 7. Thomas Stearns Eliot, a modern poet, author and critic, he says, poetry is not a turning loose of emotion but an escape from emotion. It is not the expression of personality but an escape from personality. But of course, only those who have personality and emotions know what it means to want to escape from these things. Eliot puts a different view regarding poetry. Till this view, we understand that a poem is an expression of emotions, but it is not so for Eliot. For him, it is a means to relieve the deep pressured emotions, and it also does not manifest the poet or his or her personality but finds a way to relieve it. Here we have the last definition or opinion by Edgar Allen Poe, a 19th century American poet and short story writer, and he says about poetry, poetry is the rhythmical creation of beauty in words. Here, Poe considers a poem produces rhythm through words and is an aesthetic creation, a beauty in and of language. Friends, these definitions are enough to understand the meaning and nature of poetry. Now, we can say, considering the above views and thoughts, that poetry is the most fecund and effective form of literature, highly competent to explore the complex and critical emotions and thoughts through brief rhymed and rhythmic lines or stanzas. Here, we must clear one thing, that poetry cannot be confined in definitions because no definition or opinion is perfect which reveal all the qualities or features of poetry. Therefore, to understand poetry at its length, we should learn its qualities and features. And here are some of the characteristics of poetry or elements of poetry. Number 1. Language and diction. It is one of the dominant features of poetry. The language of poetry is distinct from that of other forms of literature and mundane language. Though the words used in poems seem regular communicative words, their selection is more conscious. The words or vocabulary used in poetry is called diction. This particular selection of words create an effect more expressive. In novel, the author have larger scope to use more elaborative language and vocabulary, but a poet need to be very careful in choosing words as he or she gets a little space of a few lines or stanzas. A poet cannot be as elaborative as novelist, but poets have got poetic license, meaning they can violate rules and norms of language use. The language of poetry is charged with figurative ornaments, that is, figures of speech like simile, metaphor, personification, alliteration, etc. The second feature is structure and composition. Undoubtedly, the structure, form and composition of poetry is different compared to other genres of literature. It has verse form opposite to prose. In verse, lines are composed to form stanzas, whereas in prose, sentences are written to form paragraphs or passages. It is easy to recognize a poem. When we look at the text, immediately we understand whether it is poem or else through its shape of lines and stanzas without reading a single line. Poem look like a poem. There are different types of stanza forms exploited by poets in their poetry, such as couplet 2-line stanza, tercet 3-line stanza, quatrain 4-line stanza, rhyme royal 7-line stanza, ottowa 8-line stanza, Spenserian stanza 9-line stanza, etc. Number 3. Rhythm, rhyme and meter. As we have seen in the definitions above, a poem includes rhythm, rhyme and it is a metrical composition. Rhythm is a particular pattern of progressive sound generated while reading or listening to a poem. Repeating a poem again and again, we can understand the flow of sound. Rhyming is the placing of words which sound alike. Often such words are placed at the end of lines. But we also find similar sounding words in the lines which are called internal rhyming. Here are a few rhyming words: cat, mat, foil, coil, red, shade, light, fight, etc. A poem can be measured through meter. Meter, again, a particular syllabic pattern occurring line after line in poetic feet. We have poetic feet like iamb, spondy, trochee, dactyl, anapest, etc. And based on these feet, we have meters, visor, diameter 2 feet, trimeter 3 feet, tetrameter 4 feet, pentameter 5 feet, hexameter 6 feet, so and so forth. To understand the foot, we should know the syllables, whether they are stressed or unstressed. All poems do not follow these patterns of rhyme and meter. There are poems which abandoned rhyming and meter. For example, free verse, and in blank verse we have meter, that is iambic pentameter, but not rhyming. The fourth element of poetry is images and symbols. Poetry is the highest manifestation of imagination. Poet creates picture through the words used in poem. Images stand for the perception of anything representing another thing. Poets do not create direct or straight pictures as painters do, but through images. The very intention of imagery is to visualize the picture of object delineated in the poem. Take Wordsworth's Daffodils, and the lines are: that floats on high over vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. A perfect picture of golden daffodils stand in our mind. Let's list the words caused to produce this picture in our mind, and the words are floats, whales, hills, saw, crowd, host, golden, daffodils, lake, trees, fluttering, dancing and breeze. Symbol, similar to image, more firm and static, also represent the another object than mentioned in the poem. It signifies and stands for other object. For example, the red color is the symbol of danger. Symbols are integral part of poetry, an indirect medium to convey or share the deep message or view to the readers. It is the idea or quality which stand for the other idea or quality varies to its literal or actual meaning. For example, William Blake's "Oh, sunflower," and the lines are: "Oh, sunflower, weary of time, who countest the steps of the sun, seeking after that sweet golden clime, where the traveller's journey is done." Here we have two symbols, one sunflower and the other the sun. The sunflower stands for human being or person, and the sun for very life. A poem can have as many interpretations as the number of its readers. The next element is sound and musical quality. It is a very significant feature or element of poetry. Poems are known for their sound and musical quality, and hence we remember them for longer time. Poets use sound and music devices in poems such as alliteration, consonance, assonance, or direct sounds of objects like birds, wind, water, animals, etc. There are two types of sound devices used in poetry. One, euphony, and second, cacophony. Euphony is a melodious or harmonious sound pattern, whereas cacophony is a harsher and shrill sound pattern. In euphony, long vowels, semi-vowels and some consonants like I, M, N, R, F, W, F, W, S, Sh, Y and Th are often used to create sweet sound effect. Let's take example of John Keats' Ode to Autumn, and the lines are: seasons of mists and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatched eaves run. Here we can find out the above sounds and their pleasing effect. In cacophony, shrill and loud sounds are found, as in the famous poem by Jane Taylor, and the lines are: twinkle, twinkle, little little star, how I wonder what you are, shining in the sky so bright, like a tea tray in the night. Friends, these are the very basic or fundamental characteristics or elements of poetry which are distinguishable to other forms of literature like novel, short story, drama, essay, etc. Poetry may voice other features too, similar to these mentioned forms, have such as theme or subject matter, mood and tone, setting and atmosphere, and the last, narration, which is related to who is the speaker in the poem. This list may be included other features also, but I think the above are enough to frame a picture of what is poetry and its elements. Now friends, I have some of the famous poems to be read or to be studied for further knowledge. The very first is Sonnet 18, or Shall I Compare Thee to a Summer's Day, by famous poet William Shakespeare. Second, Sonnet 116, or Let Me Not the Marriage of True Minds, again by famous poet William Shakespeare. The third is The Weeper by Richard Crashaw. 4. An Horatian Ode upon Cromwell's Return from Ireland by Andrew Marvell. 5. The Tiger by William Blake. 6. A Red Red Rose by Robert Burns. 7. She Walks in Beauty by Lord Byron. 8. Youth and Age by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. 9. Elegy Written in a Country Churchyard by Thomas Gray. 10. To Autumn by John Keats. 11. A Lament by P.B. Shelley. 12. Daffodils by William Wordsworth. 13. Concord Hymn by Ralph Waldo Emerson. 14. Friendship by Henry David Thoreau. 15. The Road Not Taken by Robert Frost. 16. The Wasteland by Thomas Stearns Eliot. 17. This Is Just to Say by William Carlos Williams. And the last one is Paradise Lost Book First by John Milton. Friends, there are so many other poems which you can read and understand the poetry, and also you can compose poems while considering these features and their definitions. It's very simple. Friends, thank you very much for watching the complete tutorial, and I am very sure about that you must be learnt about the basics of poetry, its definition, meaning and some of the features. If you have any difficulty regarding this tutorial or regarding poetry, you can go into the comment box and share your opinion or difficulty with me. I will try to solve these difficulties in the coming videos. So friends, like this video, share this video among your friends, and significantly subscribe to Literature Simply, and also press the bell icon so that you can get the updates on language and literature.